Hi everyone, welcome to the Stitches and Scribbles channel. My name is Erin and I have a book podcast for you today. So today I'll be talking about all the books that I read in March, which wasn't a ton, but I am starting to pick up a little bit of speed on my reading this year. And I have another book haul to show you as well. The last couple months have been a lot of purchasing or finding books to add to my collection and not as much reading as I would like, but I know that it'll catch up a little bit over the summer and I have spring break coming up, so I know that I'll get some reading done then as well. And I'm just kind of at a point where I'm really excited about bringing in new books. Like, I've had a lot of fun kind of picking out a stack of books to keep by my bed to read before going to sleep at night. I've had fun picking out some books at school to read while I'm sitting either doing silent reading time with kids or on the odd day that I have 10 minutes with no task, I'll read a chapter of a book because that feels appropriate for a librarian. And I've found that in the last month or so, I've had a lot of joy surrounding reading. There's a lot of books that I'm really excited about, even though I haven't been reading necessarily as fast as I usually do. But I also tackled a couple longer books in there, so that could be the reason for that as well. I realized I started talking and hadn't actually pulled up my book list on my phone yet, so I'm just doing that real quick. In case you were wondering, I actually use an app called Storygraph to keep track of everything that I read, which makes it really easy since sometimes I read books that I don't physically have with me, either because they belong to a library or a friend, or books that I read digitally. So it makes it really easy to still be able to show what I read, even if I don't have like a physical book to hold up and show you. And I like Storygraph over Goodreads because it gives you a lot more data about your reading. It makes some fun little charts and things. And Goodreads is owned by Amazon, which I don't think is inherently bad, but I have heard some reports that some books that have like a deal with Amazon get kind of inflated ratings, and that I'm not nuts about. Like, if I'm going to look up a book and add it to my TBR list, I want to know that the reviews coming in are genuine reviews from people who've read the book. And since Storygraph is a little bit of a smaller platform, I prefer using that. So that was kind of just a recap for, in case anyone hadn't heard me talk about it before, but I know I have talked about it before. All right, books I read in March. The first one, as I previously said, is one that I don't have here with me because this is a book that is for the school library. It hasn't actually been added to our school library collection yet. Also, for context, in case you missed that or haven't seen my previous videos, I am a school librarian. So I do read a lot of children's books and usually don't have them with me because they belong to the school. This book happened to be one that I purchased used to donate to the school. And this is the third book in the Kingdoms and Empires series by Jacqueline Moriarty, and it was called The Stolen Prince of Cloudburst. I really enjoyed the first two books in this series, which the first one is The Extremely Inconvenient Adventures of Bronte Nettlestone. I forget if it's an M or an N. By the time I got to this one, I wasn't as enthralled with the series anymore, but the time where I finished this book, I also was having to read it in very short spurts. I didn't have a lot of time to read during the time frame where I was trying to finish this book. So I think that could have added to kind of the feeling of losing the plot a little bit. These books are very creative. I like the storyline. They're very whimsical. They remind me of kind of a combination between like Alice in Wonderland and Harry Potter, especially this one because it took place at a boarding school. So very whimsical storylines, very short chapters, which is nice for kids reading, that it's still a full-length chapter book, but the chapters sometimes are only a page or two at a time. So you can read a full chapter in a really short amount of time, which is kind of nice. I ended up giving this one 3 stars just because I didn't enjoy it as much as the first two in the series. And this series, you can read them as standalone books. They don't have a ton to do with each other. There's some overlapping characters, but it's not super critical that you read the books in order. So this is a series that I might want to revisit a couple years down the road, see kind of how my students like it, and maybe come back to it. Overall, highly recommend the series, especially for a reluctant reader because of the format of it. It's a good mix of situations that don't feel too far out into the fantasy world while still having some very strong fantasy elements. So that was the first book I read. The second book, almost knocked over my stack. The second book that I read this month was The Isles of Emberdark by Brandon Sanderson. Gave this one 5 stars, as I do with every Brandon Sanderson book. This one is another one of his secret project books, and it is a standalone. It's not a series. From the not even prologue, the introduction to the book, author's note at the beginning. I guess this book was based off of a short story that he wrote several years ago and turned into a full-length novel. This felt very different than some of the other books by him that I've read. Tress of the Emerald Sea is my favorite one. You can see it right up there behind me. Tress of the Emerald Sea felt very much like a self-contained fantasy universe. Some of his other books lean more into a halfway point between fantasy and science fiction, and this was definitely like that. If I were to describe the vibes of this book, half of the storyline is what if Indiana Jones, A, was a nice, decent human being, B, had magical birds that gave him superpowers while exploring the jungle and lost items and things like that. And also the other storyline running through the book at the same time is what if Star Trek had dragons? Those two things sound wildly different, and yet they work in this book. There are a couple of characters, actually kind of similar to the last book I talked about. It is a standalone book. There are some characters that overlap, especially with Tress of the Emerald Sea. And then Brandon Sanderson has one character who appears in a lot of his books named Hoyd. Hoyd does make an appearance in this book. But if you don't know who Hoyd is, that's not really going to affect your ability to read this, nor would it really affect your reading experience if you hadn't read Tress of the Emerald Sea. It's more of a fun little Easter egg for people who have read his other books. So I highly recommend this one. One of the things I really enjoy about Brandon Sanderson's books overall is that each little world that he creates is so distinctly different. And yet they all have these incredible fantasy elements and don't feel overwhelming to read as a reader. Sometimes with high fantasy, especially adult high fantasy, the world building aspect of it can feel very overwhelming. I kind of had that issue when I first read, I think I only ended up reading the first book in the series, but I tried to read Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan, and I didn't hate it. I think I was grateful that I had watched the TV show to kind of give my brain a framework to work with. But the number of characters to keep track of can feel very overwhelming in books like that. Somehow he does a good enough job that I don't ever feel overwhelmed by the number of characters in a given story. I probably won't remember the characters' names after reading the book, other than a few main characters. But I think because he does a lot of split storylines where there's, story A happening over here with these core group of characters and story B happening over here with this core group of characters, it makes it pretty easy to kind of keep track of things mentally. He also does a really good job of integrating the magic systems or technology systems kind of seamlessly. Frequently, it seems like there's a character in his stories who is not familiar with whatever is going on, whether it's a magic system or a political dynamic or a technology that's being used. So that character kind of almost becomes a guide for you as the reader to understand what's going on. And that's definitely true in this book as well. I'm not going to talk anymore about the plot because I think this is a book that you truly just have to experience reading. Vibes, 10 out of 10. Like I said, it's one like very like atmospheric fantasy side of things where it's, you know, an island nation and magical birds and like a very almost ancient civilization type feeling. And then on the other side, you have the kind of space travel ship on a small crew, like Star Trek or Firefly kind of vibes, but with dragons. So really, really good. Hopefully that was convincing enough for you to want to read this one. The next book I read was another one that I read at school. This is Ban This Book by Alan Gratz. I read this because some of my students were reading it, and I had some thoughts about this book. So I know the topic of removing books from library is a really big thing right now, and I will always kind of take the stance of, you know, there's a reason why some books have different target age levels, and if you know, I work in an elementary school library, I'm not going to get books that are meant for high school kids. Like, that's kind of the biggest dividing line that I have. In addition to, like, I work at a Catholic school. We have a couple of hard and fast rules about what we can include. But I don't think of it as removing anything that we disagree with. It's more of a, what was the intent of this book? Is there a lesson to be learned from the story being told? It's much more nuanced than I think some of the things that are happening in the media of schools that are just banning books that any parent takes an issue with. That's not really what I do, but I would agree with that. I try really hard to curate a collection that fits well for the students that I serve. And that does mean I look for a lot of specialty materials. In my case, it means I do seek out a lot of Catholic books. It doesn't mean those are the only ones we include. So anyway, back to this book. I had some thoughts about it. So first of all, I gave it 3 out of 5 stars, which maybe was being a little bit generous. But one of the things I found kind of a very odd stylistic choice for this book is that it is dealing with a school that is banning books, but the main characters of the book are 9 years old, which would be, what is that? 3rd graders? 3rd graders, they might be 4th graders. I don't know if it specifies what grade they're in. Kids turn 9 in 3rd grade. They turn 10 in 4th grade. So that's a very young character for this type of a storyline. And some of the content that the characters in the book are talking about of books that have been removed from their library in the story, I do think are topics that are not meant for 9-year-olds. So it was interesting that I'm using interesting again rather generously. I think it was a strange choice for the author to put this weighty of a topic onto a 9-year-old character, especially when some of the books being discussed are books about like human growth and development, which again, that's a conversation for a kid to have with parents and even learn about at school. But it's odd for an adult author to put the decision-making process of that onto a 9-year-old character. So let's kind of backtrack a little bit, talk about the premise of the book. So the premise of the book is that the main character, who I'm forgetting what her name is Amy Ann. One of her favorite books is banned from her school library. It's from the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler by E.L. Konigsberg. Banned from her school library because a parent complained about it. Amy is devastated. She loves this book. She doesn't understand why it was banned, and to a fair point. Like that, I had never personally heard of that book being banned, although I guess all of the books mentioned being banned in this story are books that have been banned somewhere in the United States. And the reason cited for that book being removed is that it teaches children to be dishonest and to commit illegal activities. I have not read this book. I do know it follows 2 children who end up living in a museum and hiding from the security guards, which, do I really want my students to do things like that? No, of course not. But it's the kind of behavior that makes a children's story fun and can have a lesson learned from it. But no kid is going to actually think that that's something that they can do, right? Like, this is a kind of innocuous book to be banned, but it's the one that the author chose to be the first banned book in this story. So Amy then realizes that there's a list that has been put out by a parent of one of her classmates of all the books that should be banned from the library. And instead of accepting that decision, Amy decides to find copies of all of the books and create her own library inside of her locker where students are checking out these banned books. And she has a whole system of who's checking them out and how long the checkout dates are. So she essentially is then getting classmates to read these books. Again, it's a really powerful storyline of a student kind of taking a stand for what she believes in and defending her favorite book. But again, this child is supposed to be 9. I don't know if you've talked to a 9-year-old lately, but this seems a little steep for something that a 9-year-old could actually pull off secretly. The other thing I thought was interesting is that, this book I will kind of give some spoilers for because it is pretty easy to see where the book is going, but it ends up with Amy attending, I forget if it's a town hall meeting or a school board, it must be a school board meeting, defending the book. The books get unbanned. The big message of the book is no one can decide what you read except your parents. So in the end, her parents do have a conversation with her of, okay, these are books you can read, this one you're not ready for. So I do agree with kind of the end message of the book of, yeah, it is up to a parent to figure out what's best for their child to read. But again, I think just the way that the author chose to go about the book was an odd choice. Mostly just the age of the characters are not really an age where they can make independent decisions. And also a lot of the books cited as being banned are ones that are not, I don't want to use the word appropriate, but like the target age of the readers is not 9-year-olds. It's slightly older. The other thing that I ended up thinking was very odd about this book, and this was totally a coincidence, but in the book, the characters meet a real author. His name is Dave Pilkey. He's most famous for the Captain Underpants series, which I personally think is terrible. A lot of people love it. I don't know. Again, it's your decision as a parent what your child reads. But I thought that decision of the students interacting with Dave Pilkey, who's a real person, was an interesting choice to begin with from the perspective of the author. And the author chose Dave Pilkey because his books are so frequently on banned lists, specifically the Captain Underpants series, just for general, not appropriate humor for kids. The part of this that I found funny is that a few years after Ban This Book was released, Dave Pilkey banned one of his own books. He had a book come out that I believe was just a standalone, but it was a spin-off of the Captain Underpants series that was cited as having inappropriate racial stereotypes in it. So Dave Pilkey requested that the book be pulled from bookstores, from libraries, from everywhere. So while the author of Ban This Book could not have known that when the book was released, I did find it kind of an odd coincidence that he just so happened to pick an author who, a few years after this book being released, would go on to ban one of his own books. All of that is to say, again, it's a topic that should be discussed, especially among people who are choosing books for their children or choosing books for a school population. But I think putting that storyline on a group of characters that is so young affected the impact of the book. And I think the choice of real-life author to use in the book, even though it could not have been predicted at the time the book was written, also affects the impact of the book. So if your child brings this book home, talk to them about it. It is a valid conversation to have, especially as parents choosing what is going to work for your child to read. It's just an interesting concept of bringing kids into this very big, very weighty decision that is a really hard decision as someone who chooses books for kids. It also meant I had some interesting conversations with my students about how we choose to add books to the library. Why do we seek out certain topics or certain series and not other ones? I don't think I have anything else to say about this one, other than I'm glad I read it for the understanding. I know it's a book that I've seen frequently mentioned in these big conversations. I do think it kind of borders on taking a very serious issue and monetizing it, and specifically making money off of children reading the book. It's complicated. I'm going to leave it at that. The next book that I read was another Brandon Sanderson. This was Warbreaker, which is another standalone book. Gave this one 5 stars, as I always do. This book is very much more on the fantasy feeling side. And I know that there's a timeline of all of Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere novels. Isles of the Emberdark is much later in the timeline, so it has some more technological advances to it, including interplanetary travel. This one does not have that. It's supposed to be set much earlier in the Cosmere timeline, Cosmere being this universe that Brandon Sanderson has created of a bunch of books that gently intertwine with each other, but are like exist as separate series as well. So since this one is older, it has more of the traditional fantasy feeling to it. It also was published much earlier. Isles of the Emberdark came out in 2025, so just this year. And Warbreaker came out in 2009, so it's much older. This book has a couple different storylines it follows. One of them is following probably the most frequent recurring storyline is Ciri's storyline. Ciri has found herself in an arranged marriage to the god king of Hallandren, and doesn't know what to expect. She knows that she has a different religious belief, being brought up in a different society, and there are a lot of rules into how she interacts with the god king, and mostly she just has a lot of questions. It also follows Ciri's sister, whose name I now cannot remember. I told you this was the problem. Vivenna. Vivenna is the other sister. Vivenna was supposed to be the one betrothed to the God King and was swapped for Ciri at the last minute. She kind of goes on her own journey to try to rescue Ciri, but also kind of figure out what's going on behind the scenes in Titalier, which is the capital city of the country of Hallandren. I'm looking at the back of the book to check like names of places and things. And then the third storyline is following one of the other gods of Hallandren. Now, the gods of Hallandren are human for all intents and purposes. They have magical powers. They also are dead bodies that have been resurrected somehow. And at the beginning of the book, we don't really understand how this works. So it follows, what's his name? Lightsong. As Lightsong is trying to figure out why he is in this position of power and who he was in his past life. So again, we've got 3 different storylines happening. All of them are excellently written. I described this book to a friend as years ago when someone told me I should read Game of Thrones, and I was hesitant to do so. With good reason. I did not end up liking the Game of Thrones series. This is what I wanted Game of Thrones to be. The high fantasy, lots of characters, interacting storylines. But Brandon Sanderson can write female characters, and it's much cleaner. Like, it's a closed door romance, essentially, in parts. Other than there is a lot of discussion of bloodlines and how you get an heir to the throne, that kind of storyline. Nothing happens on the page in that sense. Really, really good book. Well worth the over 600 pages that it took to read this. I enjoyed the reading experience of this book so much. It was excellent. Up next is House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig. This was a reread for me. I have had this on my shelf for several years, and my husband just got me the second one for my birthday. So I wanted to reread the first one. 5 stars. Love this book. It is a dark, spooky, atmospheric retelling of the 12 Dancing Princesses. So it follows mainly one sister, Annalie, who has some ghostly visions surrounding the death of her mother and her sisters. So some of her sisters have died. At the time the story takes place, I believe 5 of them have died. And she's starting to think that it's not by accident. There's something happening to her family, but she's also disturbed by these ghostly visions that she has at night. And eventually she and her remaining sisters find a magical portal that takes them all across the world so that they can attend these fancy balls at night and be back by morning. And this book is creepy in the best way. It is marked most places as young adult. I would say this should be considered on the upper end of young adult, partially just because it is so dark, but especially because of the second one, which I have actually read now, but I didn't read it in March, so we'll talk about it in the next podcast episode. There are conversations about arranged marriages and things like that. And just to like briefly go back to Brandon Sanderson, his books are all marked as adult, which is why I don't have as much of an issue with it in those books. But if you're going to purchase this for a young adult reader, I would suggest more in the 17 to 20 range of young adults, not like 13-year-olds. But it's a fantastically well-written book. Really good world building. I love kind of the imagery of everything being connected to this kind of dark and stormy sea off the cliffs of this island. Just really just creepy. It was a good creepy read. Loved that one. The next book that I read for this month was the Word Before World devotional by Gretchen Sapples. This one I also got for my birthday from my husband. And these are meant to be just little like one a day devotional passages that you read. It's a lot of her kind of personal anecdotes connected to scripture. I read this as my adoration book for the month. Again, if you haven't seen previous episodes, I attend adoration once a week. And I prefer to read during adoration. I'm a practicing Catholic. So this was my book for that. That's probably not the desired way to read it. I think this is more of a put it by your bedside table and read one a day is more what the intent was supposed to be. But either way, it was very good. I really enjoyed all of the little stories from the author, as well as there's just some really beautiful like full color quote images in there. I'm trying to find the one that I really liked. I don't remember where it was in the book. Oh, I liked this one a lot. So also just some beautiful images of some words to meditate on. I gave that one 5 stars as well. The last book that I read for this month was Hamlet, Prince of Denmark by David Hewson and A.J. Hartley, and I did the audiobook version, which was narrated by Richard Armitage. This is a novelization retelling of Hamlet, and I read this because I listened to the audio drama production of Hamlet the play earlier this year. I was supposed to go on a field trip with students from my school, and it didn't end up working out, but they were going to go see Hamlet, and I still felt after listening to the play that I did not fully understand the storyline. This did help. It was also kind of during a time frame where I did not have as much time to listen to audiobooks as I would have liked. So it still was probably broken up a little bit too much for me to like fully pull in the story, but it was very good. I would say that if you struggle to read the play and want kind of a more thorough telling of the story, this was a really good option for that. It is 9 hours and 40 minutes, so it's a fairly long book. They also definitely extrapolate on some details from the play, which was a little hard for me to comment on because excuse me, I don't remember quite all of the details of the play. But there are definitely some scenes where as I was listening, I was thinking like, did that actually happen in the play? Or is this kind of like an added detail that's being thrown in there to affect the storyline in some way? So just kind of keep that in mind if you're reading it. I did really like it. I do think it helped my understanding of the play overall. And I know that there's 2 other books kind of in the same vein by this pair of authors, and one of them is Macbeth and one is Romeo and Juliet. So I have those on my eventual TBR list, but I might try to wait to see if what plays are being offered by our local Shakespeare theater next year in case I go on that field trip again. And if it's one of those 2, then maybe I'll read it. We'll just have to wait and see. Those are all the books that I read for this month. I do have a couple that these actually look, oh no, 2 of them I got from a little library and 4 of them I purchased. So we'll kind of go through those super quick. The first one I purchased is The Awakening of Miss Prim by Natalia San Martin Fenolera, or Fenolera. I'm not sure if that double L is pronounced in English or not. I got this from our school book fair. I really like our school book fair because it does send some adult books for parents who are shopping. And this was one of them. This is a historical fiction. Maybe? Is it historical fiction? No, it's contemporary fiction. It just has a connection to Jane Austen and Louisa May Alcott, which made me think that it was historical fiction. But it is about Prudencia Prim, who accepts a post as a private librarian in a small village, and kind of the adventures surrounding that. Looks like a really cute book. I'm probably going to save this one for when I need a more lighthearted read, because it looks like that's what it is, but I'm excited to try this one. The next one I picked up, not a lighthearted read at all. This is The Gales of November, The Untold Story of the Edmund Fitzgerald by John U. Bacon. I just really wanted to read about shipwrecks, and I saw this in Barnes & Noble and absolutely had to have it. I have a book of all, or not a book, I have a bookshelf in my sunroom, which I'm pointing like you can see it, but it's over there. I have a shelf in there of all books in the Midwest, and there seems to be a subsection emerging of Midwest shipwreck books, but I did not have one specifically on the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. So I wanted to get that for my book collection, but also because I am curious to learn more about it, other than what I know from the song. So excited to read that. Next one I purchased, also from Barnes & Noble, also by Brandon Sanderson. Are we sensing a theme here? This is the Tailored Realities collection. So this is a book of science fiction short stories. I don't think any of these are supposed to be from the Cosmere universe, but I was intrigued by trying a short story collection. I'm not usually someone who's drawn to short stories, but for Brandon Sanderson, I'll try it. Excited about that. Next one, I also got from Barnes & Noble. I had a good day at Barnes & Noble one day. What can I say? This is the Library of Amerlin by Kaylin Josephson. This is the book that I initially saw at Barnes & Noble, and I made myself do a lap around the mall before going back to get it because I wanted to make sure that I really wanted the book before I bought it, and then I also bought the other 2. So my self-control in Barnes & Noble is minimal. This one, if you needed another running theme of I like books about libraries and librarians, this is fantasy librarian adventure stuff. I believe this one is breaking into a library. Looks good. I'm excited. I was getting distracted by the inside flap. Did I also buy it for the sprayed edges? Maybe. We'll find out. But I thought it was beautiful, and it was about a fantasy library, so I wanted to try it. The next two I picked up from a little free library. This one happened to be a... I am losing my voice. I've been talking about books for too long, apparently. This one is a signed copy. It's called The Trouble with Love and Ink by Harriet Ashford. This is a vacation rom-com book, but it is about a woman who decides to work for her sister's calligraphy company. I like romance books more than I used to, provided that they're still closed door romance, because I prefer that. But I am a little picky about it. It has to have some sort of connection to something I'm interested in. So I don't want the like sports romance books. It's not my thing. I don't want the like high society or like legal romances. That I know is a subcategory. I know I had a friend talk about like real estate romances, and no, those are not for me. But small tiny calligraphy company, yes, I will accept that. In the same vein, I also found a funny story by Emily Henry, which is, why did I pick this one up? Oh, because it takes place in Michigan, so another Midwest book, and one of the main characters is a children's librarian. So libraries and the Midwest, two things I am passionate about. That's it for this month. I'm excited to dive into some of those new books, read some more. I've been really into fantasy lately, as you can probably tell by some of the books that I purchased. Definitely into Brandon Sanderson lately. I have a feeling that's going to be my #1 author at the end of 2026. Although usually that gets thrown off by me like binge reading a children's series at some point because the books are shorter. As I'm talking about this, I'm currently also trying to read the Wizard of Oz series. So if Brandon Sanderson doesn't come out as the top author for 2026, I think it'll be L. Frank Baum. But excited to read some more, excited to have some time to relax this week and read some more. And if you are on, well, actually, by the time this episode airs, most people will have already had their spring break. But if you don't have spring break to look forward to, I hope that you have some relaxing time coming up where you can sit and read a book, enjoy a cup of tea, and read something that makes you happy. That's going to be it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see other stuff from my channel, mostly crafty things, stuff about books, all good stuff, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below. If you want to follow me on other social media sites, that information will be in the description box. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.